I guess the question that comes to mind first of all is you are walking into this neighborhood as a Caucasian man with a camera. How did you get people to open up for you? How did they made that
I think it's more like how did we get them not to open up too much to us?
Okay.
I think the way you go into an environment is always the most important thing. And, we spent a long time finding the right person to take us in, who was actually somebody who'd grown up in that street, a local comedian actually called Tiffany Haddish, who now is on the Kevin Hart show.
Okay.
She's but she was kind of a well-known sort of success story, very liked in the community. So when I was called Peckerwood and all the rest of it, she went over and kind of calmed them down a bit.
Gotcha.
And, so I think that made an enormous difference. And then just as Tiffany started doing more and more auditions for these shows and stuff, we met Pam.
Right.
So I think the key really is you always have somebody from that particular. It's very bright.
It is very bright, yes.
Yeah. You always have someone from that particular community who's like your goodwill angel who looks after you and takes you in. I think if we'd just gone in alone, it would have been very different.
And so at the beginning, some of Lonnie's neighbors are sort of skeptical, to say the least, about the charges against, or about the speculation around him and the charges against him. And then they start to change their tune a little bit. And how much time transpired, and what do you think motivated them to start sort of opening up more with you and sort of revealing more about what they suspected?
I think Lonnie Franklin was a very popular man in the neighborhood. He was quite wealthy. He employed a lot of people in an area where there were no jobs. He was also the local fence, so if people needed a washing machine or something, he'd get it for them. And I think it was, we were basically asking the most uncomfortable questions,
right?
That there were. So it just took. I think it took a couple of weeks or something, and then I think also because we were making the film and because we were putting a spotlight on him and the questions, I think they started slightly questioning their association with Lonnie, and they remembered bits and pieces that they hadn't told. None of them had talked to the police. I think there were things that they wanted to say. I think they were all, in their own way, quite worried about the fact that they'd probably been so close to somebody who had killed so many people.
Right.
So that sort of gnawed away at them, and they slowly started talking.
And did you sense any concern about them letting you into their homes for interviews and things like that, or did you have to sort of mitigate that in some way?
Well, it was funny because people in South Central really didn't want to be filmed in their homes at all, and so an awful lot of it was just filmed from the car. A lot of people kind of lived more in the street, and obviously a lot of the women who were on crack didn't really have a home, and so people would tend to come to our office. I mean, calling it an office is rather a grand term for it, and they would either hang out with us there or they would talk there, and they would feel. I think there's a suspicion, obviously, of outsiders.
Right.
I think people didn't want there to be lots of questions asked if they were seen talking to the film crew.
Right. And the last thing I'll ask, and I definitely want to open it up after that, is clearly the film makes or the people in the film have some choice words about the law enforcement within the area. Has the police or have the district attorneys or anybody on the judicial side seen the film or reacted to it in any way that you're aware of at this point?
Yeah, all we had a couple of big public screenings of the film in LA, and all the police, the whole task force came. The defense attorneys came, the prosecution came, and a lot of people from the neighborhood came. I don't know what the police were. The last I saw, the police were busily trying to enlist Pam to work for them. I don't think she wanted anything to do with them, but it was kind of amusing to watch. They were sort of scurrying around, I think, and looking a bit embarrassed.
Right. I can jump in again, but I'm sure there are lots of questions in the audience. So please, yes, right here, please. The woman in the audience is somewhat of a scholar of James Baldwin, and links Nick's film to the work that James Baldwin did on Atlanta child killers from, I didn't get a year, but 85, and wonders if people have connected Nick's work like this to connections between race and murder and race and serial killers within the city, within the black perspective.
And I can say that you are the only person I've met so far who's made that connection, but I will be looking into it. And thank you very much for that comment. I didn't know about it, but I know about it now, and I'll do some Googling when I leave here.
Excellent. Other questions? Yes, please. It was at the very beginning. Nick mentioned that it was hard to get people not to say too much, and the person in the audience would like to know if you could expand on that.
Well, I was cracking a rather bad joke because there was, people were sort of saying, "I got to put a cap up your ass," all that sort of thing, which I know they didn't really mean, but it did have the effect of me actually losing my first cameraman, who had mainly shot nature films. I'd shot a couple of dramas with him, and he was a really great guy, but he was like absolutely terrified. And he shot the Peckerwood thing, and people were calling out, "We're going to cap your ass," and he decided to leave after like 4 days. So I was kind of making a bad joke about that, I think.
Many of your interviewees seem pretty unreliable, to say the least. So how did you decide what material to use, how much to trust what they were saying?
That's an interesting question. Now, how many people here felt those people were completely unreliable? I think you're in the minority. Well, I think that they had a sense of real doubt and shame about what they'd done. And I think, in a way, that side of their humanity came through. I mean, it was interesting, because in some of the earlier cuts of the film, it's very easy, for example, to cut this film so that all those friends of Lonnie are like, the devil. And they're all straightforward. But I felt that you needed to remember that they'd grown up in this environment, which is basically, there's a crack epidemic, which has totally torn all families apart and estranged. It kind of caused this whole weird battle between the sexes, really, and a real breakdown in communication on a very fundamental level between men and women in the community. And so I wanted to try and, I hope, reflect that in some kind of way in the film, because I don't really think any of them were all bad. I think they were living in a very specific set of circumstances, which is really hard to believe, to imagine if you're not. It was kind of a bit more like living in a war zone. People who are really strung out on crack do really extreme things. And so I think they'd grown up in this environment where really strange behavior was pretty commonplace. I felt that there was a lot of kind of inner turmoil in all of those characters with what they'd done. And I thought they were incredibly honest. I mean, frankly, if I'd gone out every night with Lonnie Franklin, I would be inclined to say a lot less than Jerry did. And I was amazed, actually, by his honesty, And in the same way, I think Gary was really tormented by his feelings for the victims and his friendship with Lonnie. I kind of hoped that had come across. And I found, the women really, I believed them completely.
So unfortunately, we do have to wrap things up, but I want to thank Nick Broomfield for being here. I want to thank HBO Documentary Films for making the film available to us. Thanks so much for being part of Back NYC.
Thank you very much for coming.